Now this video, it's all about this topic, DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Now, the way that I will teach you everything that I know, the way that I will walk you through this topic, it's obviously for you not to only get it like, hey Jorge, like I get it. No, for you to be able to process everything that I'm gonna walk you through in order for you to communicate that to other people. You know, how can you answer a technical question in a way that you can sell, in a way that you can market yourself? You know, when someone asks you something related to this topic, how can you do that? Because let me tell you one thing, the way that you communicate what you know, the way that you communicate the experience that you have in the IT field to other people, that's exactly what's gonna make a difference for you to get that job, for you to get that promotion, for people to see that, wow, you have a lot more value to offer to the marketplace than other people. You see? It's a science on how you can do that. And that's exactly the process and how I'm gonna go through and teaching this topic. So regardless of how much you know about this topic, I know that you will be able to get a lot out of this video. Because let me ask you this. Because probably right now you're thinking, Jorge, like I got this. Like I really know this topic really well. And a lot of things are going through your mind about that. But you see, one thing is for you to think that you know, and many things going through your mind about this topic, but another, and basically the one that makes a difference is how well you communicate that to other people. How well you present that in yourself when you are talking about that topic to other people. You see? Big difference. Now, if this topic is new to you, I'm going to ask you for you to go through this video not once, but twice. Obviously, take note, but you better take note not the first time that you are going through this video, but the second time. Now, let's get back here and go through this topic. So DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Now, let's go through this exercise really quick. That way you can get a lot more out of this video. Let's say that you are going through the job interview process and you have this network or let's say system engineer, and he asks you, can you tell me what's DHCP? What would you answer me? What would you answer me? Now go through this exercise, and by the way, before you answer that question, think about this. This will help you a lot, and you better write it down. How the other 10 candidates that are gonna go through the same process and more likely getting the same questions will answer this question. Right? And probably you will notice that you were about to answer the question the same way. So how you want them, like the manager or the system engineer, to remember you? If more likely you are answering the questions the same way the other candidates are answering the questions. Right? So now you have a new perspective on how to approach this video and how to approach another technical topic. You see, this is so badass. I'm really giving you gold. So again, you know, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video, because it really takes time for me to go through this process and teach you everything that I know the way that I do it. So now let's come back here. And by the way, remember, go through the exercise, stop the video. Now that you know better how will you answer that question, that it will make you different from everyone else just by the way that you answer the questions. So the first thing, because I was going through this process myself, I'm like, okay, I need to do a video about DHCP. Okay, so let me go through it and see, you know, what I know so far based on my experience and everything else. And the first thing that came out was this. DHCP, dynamic IP addresses. Dynamic IP addresses. And you see, when you have, let's say you go to Best Buy and you buy a new laptop. So you take the laptop back home, right? So you go through the process and put in the name, everything else, and next. And then you're gonna connect the laptop to your Wi-Fi. You have a wireless router at home. So at that point, that computer to communicate on the network needs an IP address. Now, that laptop, you didn't do anything for you to get an IP from the wireless router that you have, because by default, client computers are set up to get a dynamic IP address. From who? DHCP. Now, if this was new to you, now you know, right? So DHCP provides IP addresses to end devices that are, by default, by the way, okay, set up and configured to get a dynamic IP address from, again, DHCP. And I will walk you through in the next few minutes on the exact process that it goes through. It's really badass. And if you are able to explain that to other people, even better, because that's exactly how you can position yourself like a badass in the IT field. Okay? So, again, that's one thing that I was thinking when I was thinking about this topic, dynamic IP addresses. And then something else came up, and I'm like, okay, if I have dynamic IP addresses, obviously I'm going to have static IP addresses. Now my question to you is, what's the difference between a static IP address and a dynamic IP address? And by the way, please, don't dare to answer that question with a technical definition, because that's what everyone else does. And you think, oh, I got that question right, they're gonna hire me. No, because the other 10 people that went through the same process answered that same fucking question the same way. You didn't listen to me. You didn't differentiate yourself. You didn't sign up for the coaching program. So sign up or the membership site. Anyways, so coming back here, so difference between a static IP address and a dynamic IP address. What would you say? You know, something that probably will take you about 2 to 3 minutes for you to be like, wow, you know, I can tell you something. And by the way, Jorge, I'm going to tell you a lot more than just this. But I'm going to get that opportunity when you're asking me that question for me to tell you a lot more. Obviously related to the question that you are asking me. Right, something else for you to think about. So again, right, for me to answer that question will be something like this. I'm like, okay, so we have obviously many end devices, network devices on our network. Most of them will have and will be configured with a dynamic IP address, but that some of them, they better have a static IP address. So now I'm going to walk you through this process so you can see it. That's exactly how we'll answer that question if you were the manager. So let me kind of put it this way so you can see it. Remember, it's not all about, oh, I get it, I think I get it. No, like I see it, like that makes sense to me, like I really get you, Jorge. And they will be able to do that if I explain it like this way. Always images for them to see it. Remember that. So you're the manager, right? And I've basically been telling you this, and then I'm like, okay, so let's put it this way. We have client computers. And these client computers are the ones that more likely are the ones that will be asking for network resources. So we have client computers, and those are the ones that are going to be asking for network resources. And those are the ones that will be configured. And by the way, they're already by default configured to get a dynamic IP address. And that's obviously through a DHCP server. Okay, now, the ones they need a static IP address are more likely the ones they're gonna be providing, not the ones asking, but the ones that will be providing those network services that the client computers are asking for. So right away, right? Servers, all the servers need a static IP address. Printers, scanners, right? They're not asking, they're providing services, resources to the client computers. You see, one way for me to look at it and be like, that makes sense. I see it. You see? Now, what's the difference between these two? Obviously, that we need to know. And that's a static IP address, it's manually. Dynamic IP address, as we know so far, DHCP through this service. Now, a static IP address, that means manually, that's when you have to go physically and statically, manually assign, configure that server with the IP that you want to put in on that server, on that printer. So that's something that you have to do, and that's good because you do not want those end devices, servers, printers, and other, obviously, like routers and some others, for that IP address to change. Remember, there are hundreds, probably thousands of client computers, you know, looking up for those services, requesting some type of network resources. So obviously, you don't want those servers, printers, to change their IP. That's why you assign a static IP, because that IP will never, ever, ever change, only if you go back and you change it yourself. With a dynamic IP, that IP address can be yours today, and tomorrow can be not yours. It can be another computer will get it. But that's a process that I will walk you through in the next few minutes. But you see, now you start seeing what's going on, the picture. Now, if this was new to you, probably it starts making sense to you, and you start putting that in a way that you can be like, wow, yes, it really makes sense. I can really see it. Okay, so let's move on. Now, another thing that you need to think about, because I was thinking about that, is, well, DHCP, it's a protocol. So all protocols have port numbers. So that's one thing that I was thinking. So what would you answer me? Because probably this is something that you know. What's the port number of DHCP? And probably you're like, Jorge, I got that. I got this. I got this. That's port 67. Okay, that's it. Nothing else? Nothing else for you to tell me? And if you're like, no, Jorge, let's move on. Wrong. You just answer that question like everyone else. And you see, you think you are proud of yourself because you were able to answer that question. Wrong. Everyone else will be able to do that. So how can you make a difference? You know, and probably this is something that you know or you may not. But you should know that we have port 67 and port 68. Port 67 and port 68 with DHCP. And you know, Jorge, another thing that I can tell you is this. That when we have protocols, yes, we do have port numbers. But we also, you know, how that protocol, that application protocol is going to go from one computer to another computer. From point A, let's say, to point B. And that's also based on that transport method that we're going to be using. And by the way, that's based on that transport layer of the OSI model. And we have two, by the way, Jorge, I don't know if you know this, but we have TCP and UDP. And there's no time for me to tell you in details about that now, but if you want me to, I can. But most protocols out there use TCP. But this one, DHCP, uses UDP. Again, all about that transport layer. And by the way, Jorge, I was telling you that we have two ports, and that's because 67, it's used by, bam, that server. And 68, it's used by, bam, and my computer. So let me, 1 second, and let me see, hide. Okay, so the next one will be a client. So this port will be for the client computer. So let's go through this process. This will be, you see so far how much are you getting out of this content, this video? So now let's go to another thing, a broadcast. So this is another thing that you need to think about, a broadcast. And you're probably thinking, Jorge, we are not talking about switches. And when you're telling me a broadcast, I'm thinking about switches. But you see, let me tell you one thing. When a computer gets connected to the network and you plug in the network cable, what happens? It sends a what? A broadcast. And that's something that I will walk you through like right now and that process, you know, because basically that's what's happening. You have, you know, these client computers, and let's say they are all new. You took them out of the box, you plug them into the layer 2 switch that works on the layer and the data layer of the OSI model. You know, it's all about MAC addresses and broadcasts and all the good stuff, right? So, but that computers are off. That computers, all of them, they're off. So what's gonna happen? As soon as you turn on each of those computers, boom, it's gonna send a broadcast. That broadcast is basically saying, hey, I want to communicate on the network. You know, when you have your laptop at home and it's off and you turn that computer on, and as soon as all services goes up, it's gonna send the broadcast, okay? And then your wireless router is gonna get it, right? And then in this case, the DHCP will be like, oh, that's for me because you are asking for an IP address so you can communicate on the network. So you can obviously also go online and go to your Facebook, YouTube, Google, whatever it might be, right? So let's go through that process because that process is called DORA. You send that broadcast, so basically saying, hey, I want to communicate, I need a DHCP server. So that process at that point, it's called DORA. And that's basically discover, offer, request, and acknowledge. And I'm gonna walk you through that process right now. So let's go through it, okay? And by the way, this is something for you to type in. This is something for you to type in. And this is something that makes sense to me. This is not something that I got on another website. a lot of the times you have to go through this process for you to clearly understand what's going on related to a topic, for you to be able to make it your own, and then you can come up with something that makes sense to you. And that's how I teach these topics, in a way that makes sense to me, because if it makes sense to me, I know it will make sense to you. So, the process that a computer and a DHCP goes through. So DORA, it's a process that an end computer and a DHCP goes through to provide DHCP, the one that provides, and get, the client computer is the one that's gonna get an IP address. Again, this is something for you to write down. Now, let's go through that process. So as you can see, we have, like 5 computers, desktop computers. We have the layer 2 switch, and we have them plug in. And by the way, right now, the computers are off. The computers are off. So now we're thinking, okay, so based on my learning, these computers need to communicate, so they need an IP address. So I can do that by myself, and that's fine. 5 computers, I can go to each one of them and statically assign an IP address out of this network. I can do that, but I know that company is gonna grow and grow. And eventually, we will have not 5, but probably 100 computers. So that will be not a good idea for me to do that. That will be a nightmare. So let's do that. Let's go through this process and do it right from the get-go, right? So we need to set up a DHCP server. And by the way, that can be through a Windows Server 2008, 2012, 2016, 2019, any operating system, server operating system. Again, 08 to 12 to 16 to 19, right? Again, based on this topic, DHCP server. Now, a router, a Cisco router, can do that, and that's something that I'm going to talk about by the end of this video. An appliance, that's some appliance called Infoblox, and they can do that. That's what we have. And that company that I work for right now, every other company before this one, it was all based on Windows and Windows Server. But this one, it was like they have this appliance called Infoblox, and that's where we manage the DHCP. Again, that's for another video. So in this case, we go through the process, and this is how, just for you to get an idea on how we configure that. And by the way, that's a role. That's basically a role that you have to install within the operating system. And then basically we need to create a scope, and then we're gonna have something that's called address pool, addresses lists, and we have one thing that's called the scope options, and that's where not only the DHCP provides an IP, but it also provides other TCP/IP settings like DNS IP, like the gateway IP, the default gateway, and the subnet, all the good things. Okay, so that's basically, we go through that process. So it's done. We connect it to the switch, but we need some type of redundancy, meaning like if this server goes down, guess what? We have 5 now, I guess, but let's say when we get 100 users like unable to connect because they don't have an IP, that's bad. So we need a backup, right? So we set up another DHCP server, so now we have 2. Now what's gonna happen right now? So that computer, they're gonna turn on, right? And then boom, they're gonna send a broadcast. And remember about a broadcast. A broadcast, if this computer sends a broadcast saying, hey, I wanna connect to the network, I'm looking for the DHCP so they can give me an IP address. Once that switch gets that, because it's a broadcast, all other devices and devices connected to that switch will get a broadcast. So when this computer do that, all devices will get a broadcast. When this computer do that, all devices connected to the switch will get that. And obviously they're gonna drop it. But the ones that will not drop it, and that's why I put the arrows, is because they're going to the two servers, they have DHCP. Now, both will get a broadcast and be like, oh, I'm not DHCP. So now let's go through this process called DORA, right? So now let's go through the process called DORA. So at that process, the broadcast gets sent. And at that point, that's when they're basically, we go through that D, discover. And that's when the broadcast is happening. D for discover. Hey, is there any DHCP out there? Again, that's through the broadcast. These 2 servers, they're gonna get it because both are DHCP. And both, they're gonna reply, both at the same time probably, okay? And they're gonna get the offer. And then basically what that happens, let's say it's this computer. So when that happens, these two servers are gonna send an offer, an IP each of those servers. And in this point, that computer don't care. Like really, that computer do not care which one, what IP to choose. I'm just gonna go with the first one they got back to me, the first one. Okay, so let's say this one was the first one. So basically the computer will be like, hey, I'm gonna request the IP that you send me, and the server will be, okay, no problem. I'm gonna acknowledge that. And by the way, what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna send you not only the IP, but I'm gonna send you the other TCP/IP settings like the DNS, the default gateway, the subnet mask. That way you are fully ready for you to connect to your local area network, and obviously for you to connect to other devices that are outside your local area network. Bam! That's all of it through that DHCP server. And that's exactly the process called DORA. Discover, offer, request, and acknowledge. Okay? Now, you see, you got an IP, you have the subnet mask, the default gateway, and the DNS. And obviously, those computers have the respective IP address, and everything will be good to go. And bam! Coming back here, right? So one of these servers will be a DHCP server, or it can be a router. I told you, right, that it can be a router, a DHCP server. You know, and you go through this process. I haven't seen this apply in any company that I work for, but that's more likely when the company, it's not that big, probably 10, 20, 30 users. They don't have the budget, you know, to set up a DHCP server, even though they may have a server, and they may be using just the DHCP router, a Cisco DHCP, a Cisco router. That's an option that you can do that, and that's obviously something that you learn once you go through your CCNA. And that's it. That's it. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, comment underneath this video. What I just went through is for you to kind of get like the big idea on what DHCP does, and obviously for you to be able to go through this process, make it your own, and be able to communicate this to other people. Remember, that's exactly what's going to make a difference for you to get a better job in the IT field, for you to get a higher position, to get that promotion, and obviously for you to be able to communicate really well with other people like project managers, executives, recruiters, and other IT engineers. So again, share the video, like the video, comment, and I will talk to you in the next video.